So let's have a look at the MkII microamp effects pedal. First of all, the setup, I've got the pedal. It's a floor pedal. Normally it'd be on the floor. I've got it on the desk next to me for a couple of reasons. It's easier for me to film it. It's easier for me to adjust the settings on it if I want to demonstrate that in the video. But normally that'd be somewhere on the floor. That's the idea of these floor pedals. In terms of how I've got it set up, my guitar is going straight into the MkII microamp, and that's going straight into the amp where I'd normally plug my guitar in. So although I've spoken in previous videos about perhaps using certain effects pedals in the effects loop or in the front of the amp, which is what I'm doing now. This is in front of the amp, as we call it, just to keep it simple and to keep it accessible, because not everybody has got an amplifier with an effects loop. So I thought if I just demonstrate these pedals just going into the front of the amp, that's how everybody will be able to hear it if they don't have the effects loop in their amp. Also, with some pedals, and this is a good example, that can affect how the pedal actually works and how it might change your sound in ways that you want it to or don't want it to. So we'll run through that as well. Let's talk about the actual pedal. Now, the pedal itself, the idea for it, the idea that I wanted it for, was to give me a volume boost, so to raise the level of the sound of my guitar for whatever reason. That might be because I'm playing a particular part and then the next part in the song needs to be at a louder level. It might be that I'm playing a song and I come to a solo section and that wants to be a little bit louder. But my reason for choosing the pedal was to be able to quickly just hit a button and be able to raise the volume of the guitar sound without obviously having to go back and tweak on the amp. So that's the core reason for me having it. Now, as I mentioned, that because at the moment I've got this plugged in the front of the amp rather than the effects loop, I plan to use it in the effects loop. Because it's plugged in the front of the amp, it can also change the actual sound of your guitar. And by that I mean when you put any kind of a boost or anything that raises the volume into the input on your amp, the front of your amp, it tends to create something called a little bit more gain, which is more distortion on the sound. So you'll be able to hear it. I'll show you when I play it. That is a side effect of doing it this way. I don't want that because I can do that separately on my amp, but if you don't have those features on your amp, to be able to add a little bit more gain or a little bit more boost just by changing the settings on the amp channels, which I've done a video on that on the Blackstar HT Club. I'll put a link to that as always. So I can do that with my amp channel settings, but if your amp doesn't feature that, then that could be an alternative use for you to use one of these boost pedals. So to begin with, if I'm playing, let's say I'm playing a clean part, you should be able to see the pedal's off at the minute, so it's not doing anything to my sound whatsoever. There's nothing else connected. This is just me and the amplifier on a clean sound playing, I don't know, let's play some Dire Straits. So there's no boost there, that's just the amp as it sounds. Now, after that little riff, if I was to play the full song, I'm going to come to a solo section. Now that's typically where I might want a little bit of boost to be involved. So if I play that through and then go into the solo, just to play the first few notes of it now, that's at the same level, the same sound as what I was playing the chords at. Ideally, I'd perhaps want that solo bit to be a little bit louder and perhaps even to have a little bit more gain, a little bit more bite. So that's an instance of where I might use a boost pedal like this in the front of the amp to enhance the sound. So from going from the chords, I'll click in the boost pedal. And so on and so forth. without the boost. It's the same notes, but it's giving it a little bit of a lift, a little bit more gain and bite. It's not distorted, it's not heavy metal sound, but it does give it that little bit more edge, which helps you have a little bit of sustain and a little bit more ringing out for those solo sounds. So in terms of using this in front of the amplifier like I am doing now, that's an example of how I'd use it. I plan to use it in the effects loop, which is it's not going to affect my sound, it's not going to give me more gain, it's just going to make whatever I play a little bit louder, or a lot louder if I want to. As you can see, I've got the knob there on the pedal. That affects how much louder the sound's going to be when I kick in the pedal. Now, I found through experimentation, I suggest you probably do this if you use a pedal like that, whatever level of sound that you have normally. So I don't know, I'll just pick notes on my A string. If I activate the pedal, obviously that's louder. And without the pedal, it's worth finding out whereabouts on this dial the point is where it's the same level of volume. I'll turn that down. Still a bit louder. It's about there. So at that point on the setting, that's roughly about the same as without the pedal, so that's my reference setting. So anything above there, when I turn this gauge up, it's going to add more level to the sound. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a boring pedal, but there's not much to say about it. In the way that I'm using it, as I've said, it affects the amount of gain, distortion that you have, but that tends to be more pronounced on a clean sound. If you're already using a heavily distorted sound, it's not going to change the sound that much. So I'll switch it off again, I'll put it up so it was giving me a boost. I'll change my channel on the amp to more distorted sound. So I'm going to play something on a distorted sound. So put the pedal on. It's a little bit louder, but because I'm using so much distortion and gain anyway, it's not really giving me that much difference in the sound. I can hear a little bit as I'm sat in front of the amp in the room, but I imagine when I listen back to this on camera how you will hear it, there's not that much difference. It wasn't as noticeable as it was on the clean sound. So the more distorted your sound is to begin with, the less difference one of these is going to make to you. The only real difference it might make is it will give you that little bit of extra gain to make things like harmonics and articulations ring out a little bit more with the pedal engaged on a distorted sound. So if you're playing something that's got those type of things, little harmonic there at the end. Bit more sustain. The harmonic rings out a little bit better, and for that reason you might want to use it for that as well, but we're getting a little bit off course here. The main thing about these is boosts your volume level and lets you play something a little bit louder than what you normally were without having to mess with your amp. The more distortion you've got, the less difference in sound you'll hear. If you put these in the effects loop of the amp, which is what I'm probably going to do, it won't change the sound of the amp. All it will do is give me the volume boost. That's the reason why I decided to go for this. So I'm quite pleased with it. There's not much to learn about it. It's just the knob is how loud you want it, and the button is when you want it and when you don't want it. So super simple pedal, which is great because when you're playing in a live environment, you don't want to have to twiddle and mess through loads of different knobs and settings. A nice, easy, simple pedal is great and helps to enable you to enjoy